Building in-situ resilience in CKG. CKG is located in the historic centre of Freetown and is comprised of 3 informal settlements: Crabtown, Kolleh and Greybush. In the early 1970s, when the National Stadium was constructed south of Greybush, nearby vacant land became populated with people working on its construction and seeking livelihood opportunities. As migration to Greybush continued into the 1980s, people began to settle in the adjacent low-lying Crabtown, catching crabs in the Crocodile River for livelihood. The coastal area near the Kingdom landfill then started being reclaimed to form Kolleh. The Civil War in 1991 to 2002 saw 500,000 people migrate into Freetown, most of whom stayed after the war, further densifying the population of CKG. Today, an estimated 21,000 people live in an increasingly consolidated CKG. No more land can be reclaimed from the Crocodile River, and an expansion into the Kingdom landfill is happening at a slower rate. This year's UCL students found a dynamic, multi-hazard situation and social spatial differences in CKG. These create differences in how people experience vulnerability and exposure to seasonal and daily hazards and to their capacity to act. Building on these findings, we found that a lack of urban planning and affordable housing has contributed to the densification of housing in CKG, resulting in the consolidated compound housing structures, particularly in the dense lower area of Crabtown and Kolleh. Compound structures are typified by their dense habitation, spatial configuration of adjoining units, poor access to services, and in and out of housing units. This creates mobility challenges for individuals according to their age, gender, and number of dependents, particularly during flood events. The location of compounds impacts the hazards experienced by compound residents. Variables include whether they are built on safe or banked land, their position within the topography of CKG, and proximity to hazardous areas including the landfill or the narrowed Crocodile River. This year, we focused on flooding hazards since they intersect with compound housing and cause residents to seasonally leave their homes and return. This bouncing back and forth within and out of CKG settlements is a dynamic which was verified by the CKG community leaders during focus group discussions. The duration of these dynamics is influenced by the frequency and severity of flooding and the degree to which coping capacities are preventative or reactive. The type of flooding event is also a key determinant, from intense flash flooding lasting a few hours to prolonged periods of flooding which displace people for a number of months. Livelihood opportunities, a lack of affordable housing alternatives, and a strong sense of belonging within each community drives residents to return, rebuild, and repopulate risk-prone compound locations. However, whilst bouncing back is a coping mechanism, residents may return to former precarious living conditions, creating a risk trap. This year, our research has shown that the disaster recovery process can be leveraged as an opportunity to enhance existing social and kinship networks, which can enable residents to bounce forward in disaster recovery by moving to less hazardous areas in the settlement or upgrading existing housing, thereby reducing vulnerability and building in-situ resilience. That is, building resilience where people are without their relocation. We propose this may provide an alternative to relocation strategies which disrupts vital social networks. However, we found that the ability for people to leverage social networks for flood recovery is influenced by their social identity and status, which in turn will influence individual trajectories for flood recovery.
We spent 5 days in the community undertaking transit walks, interviews with landlords and tenants, focus groups with women and men in which participants plotted their compounds and safe areas during flooding. We also interviewed 3 individuals from CKG to understand how their social networks support them during and after flooding events and impacts their relocation trajectories. One of the residents we interviewed moved from the lower to a higher area of Greybush after flooding in 2015.
When I came into this community, I was living here because this land was owned by my uncle. I'm one of the members of CDMC.
Yes.
So normally for here, when flood come, I will go around and tell people, hey, let's move up and let's go to the upper part up because we don't have flood upper parts here.
Okay.
His membership of the CDMC and FEDERP means he is one of the first people to hear warning of flooding events, enabling him to identify and help exposed and vulnerable residents within his community. Moving within his community meant he retained the neighborhood network in which he realized to provide childcare, enabling him to go to work and protecting his sense of security and belonging within CKG.
Yeah, it's safer a little bit because they have banking.
Yeah.
Another resident we spoke to is recognized for her childcare responsibilities in her community. When her house was severely damaged by flooding in 2015, ensuring the safety of the community's children made her a key stakeholder in the flood recovery process, especially for her neighbors and friends whose children she helped to the National Stadium or other safe areas. This resident is a member of a flexible Osusu savings group which provides her quick access of money in emergencies. Such flexibility is particularly important to enhance women's coping capacities and facilitates this resident to improve her situation after flooding, thereby bouncing forwards. A third resident plays a key role in her community's flood recovery process each year. As a resident of Upper Greybush, which does not get flooded, she is in a position to host flood victims, many of whom are strangers to her, from lower areas of CKG, providing them shelter, food, and medicine. During flooding, this resident also goes to rescue any friends and family who may live in lower areas. Despite Crabtown, Kolleh, and Greybush each being distinct settlements, social cohesion exists across all three, in the form of social networks which people use to return after flooding events and to bounce forwards and better their situation. These are faith-based organizations, family, friends, neighbors, saving groups, and CBOs, including the CDMC and youth groups which reinforce. Our final days in Freetown involved a workshop with 37 stakeholders from across CKG, representing these 6 social networks, which we found to be instrumental in the flood recovery process. During the workshop, participants analyzed and presented the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and barriers that each social network faces during and after flooding in CKG.
40 cross-network strengths were leveraged to propose a number of community-led ideas to enhance how people can recover better after flooding. Building on the community's ideas, we propose a 2-part strategy called Let We Share, Let We Learn, Let We Build, which aims to build in-situ community resilience through social and institutional learning, and provides an alternative to relocation. The first step is the short to medium-term Social Learning Alliance, which uses existing stakeholder capacities to reinforce citywide networks through learning. We propose a social learning alliance between the CKG and Kolleh communities, due to their ability to raise significant funds to collectively tackle flood reduction in 2017. Kolleh also has a similar coastal topography and is located next to the city's Granville Brook dump site. The Social Learning Alliance will use 2 key stakeholder networks. FEDERP has an intercommunity, citywide, and international network which can be leveraged for knowledge sharing. Their established saving groups, including the For Bambai Trust Fund, or FTF, are instrumental for fund mobilization, which supports the community's analysis that although the social networks in CKG have plenty of organized human capital and mechanisms to cope, they often lack the necessary funds to be effective. The second stakeholder is the Community Disaster Management Committee, whose organization and influence in CKG mobilizes significant human capital in disaster response. The CDMC can also leverage citywide information sharing with other CDMCs and municipal governance bodies. This strategy furthers targets within Transform Freetown, an inclusive strategic plan for the city's development. The Transform Freetown environmental management target promotes the empowerment of communities and scaling up of existing community-based disaster resilience efforts. The strategy also aligns with the Sierra Leone Urban Research Center's City Learning Platform, which identifies CKG as a potential settlement to be incorporated, to discuss experiences, coordinate and develop proposals to upgrade informal settlements in a participatory space dedicated to learning and sharing with other informal settlements in the city. The proposed Social Learning Alliance can become a space for citywide urban planning considerations to inform practices and projects linking settlements higher up in the hills with other downhill areas, for example, to account for the displacement of water and waste to areas located lower down in the catchment area, like CKG.
Given the municipal plans to relocate the Kingdom landfill, in the longer term, we speculate that as the land becomes available and waste-related hazards are removed, the encroachment of market forces will become inevitable, leading to gentrification and increase in land value as CKG becomes increasingly attractive to developers. These market dynamics are likely to increase unaffordability and the pressure of forced relocation on marginalized and poor groups. Protecting the social value of CKG at this time is paramount to ensure the sustainable, just, and inclusive development of Freetown, and to promote housing and livelihood-related certainty for residents of CKG. The second part of our strategy, therefore, proposes institutional learning for a municipal financing strategy, which facilitates the Freetown City Council to generate own source revenue using land-based financing tools. These tools are already being implemented in multiple sub-Saharan African cities to shape their own development and deliver infrastructure services. The first tool is land value capture. As infrastructure is developed in CKG, causing land values to rise, this public revenue policy would allow the Freetown City Council to capture the generated value and use it to fund affordable land, rental housing, and community infrastructure. The second tool is development contributions, where developers and landowners are incentivized by the FCC to allocate economic resources for investment in affordable housing and infrastructure projects. The Transform Freetown Plan includes urban planning and housing targets to construct over 5,000 quality, low-cost housing units by 2022, and develop the City Council's mandate to tax property development-related activities. In doing so, the Freetown City Council has laid the path for institutional learning with other sub-Saharan African cities to build a municipal financing strategy using land-based financing tools, providing essential affordable rental housing and infrastructure. More information on land-based financing tools is available from UN Habitat and Beresford et al.'s paper on land-based financing in sub-Saharan African cities. In this paper, Beresford et al. Refer to 4 key criteria which need to be fulfilled for land-based financing to be effective: existing demand, increasing supply of urban land for development, an effective and accountable local government, and the willingness of landowners and developers. We pose that the first 3 criteria are currently met by CKG's central location, the imminent removal of the dump site, and the creation of Transform Freetown. We pose that these factors, plus the inevitable market pressures produced by development, will generate a willingness from landowners and developers which will fulfill the last criteria. When implementing land-based financing tools, there are several technical planning considerations which are required. These include the form of redevelopment, including land tenure arrangements, and the reblocking and morphology of housing units. Careful consideration is also required when defining the affordability of housing to accommodate the highly varied socioeconomic conditions which exist across CKG. Land-based financing tools could be applied by the Freetown municipal authorities in areas where market forces are predicted to encroach as a city transforms. However, to ensure the social value of communities are protected in these areas, we propose a bottom-up approach which uses community land management strategies. According to SLURC, the 2015 National Land Policy creates space for a land administration system which is transparent, equitable, and participatory. This could be furthered by the city authorities' adoption of a pro-poor land rights approach, which recognizes the wide range of formal, informal, and customary land rights which exist across Freetown's informal settlements. Such an approach would use community mapping, enumeration, and land administration, facilitating residents to incrementally upgrade their tenure security over time,
providing a sustainable and participatory alternative to large-scale land reforms. The election of a new and progressive mayor and the FCC's identification of a participatory and strategic plan to transform Freetown at a time when the city's municipal development and planning institutions are beginning to take shape makes this an opportune moment for Freetown to shape its development and protect the social value of its communities in a just and sustainable way, which leaves no one behind.